The horror genre is known for its ability to elicit fear in the audience through jump scares, elements of horror and violence, and its use of ominous music and sound effects to create suspense. But according to Mike Flanagan, an American filmmaker known for his horror films and shows, he believes the horror genre has progressed from just startling people to delivering a terrifying story that leave a more haunting impression on the audience. In this explanatory video essay, I propose that Flanagan's The Haunting of Hill House follow these conventional patterns of the horror genre, but Flanagan elevates his style of horror to a whole new level by applying cinematic techniques of lighting, color grading, and editing in a way that highlights the characters, themes, and the overall storyline of the show. Arguably, all these cinematic elements and techniques bring the story together and allows The Haunting of Hill House to have a lasting impression on the audience and having them wanting more. In The Haunting of Hill House, Flanagan strayed away from overusing jump scares and the supernatural to frighten the audience. While this single jump scare in the entire season did have the audience jumping out of their seats, the show focuses more on bringing out the storyline through its themes and characters. Evidently, as you make your way through each episode, the experience of grief and the aftermath of trauma that the Crane family endures after living in Hill House is considered to be the prominent theme of the show. Everyone experiences grief differently, but what's interesting to note that the viewers have recognized is that each of the Crane siblings represent the 5 stages of grief. As the oldest, Stephen plays out as in denial. He discredits any stories of ghosts or supernatural instances, yet he writes a book about his family's experience even though he doesn't believe or quite understand the true nature of Hill House. As the second oldest, Shirley represents anger. At first, she stepped in as a mother figure, feeling responsible and making sure all her siblings were okay. But as they got older and situations turned for the worse, Shirley became resentful towards her siblings, especially feeling anger towards Nell's death. As a middle child, Theo represents bargaining. Theo becomes a psychologist and uses her knowledge to help kids go through trauma and grief of their own, although she hasn't fully resolved her own personal issues. While the twins Luke and Nell represent the final 2 stages of grief, depression and acceptance. Both Luke and Nell fall into a bad place, as they were the most 2 affected by the haunting that happened in Hill House. Luke falls into a depression and gets mixed up with drugs, while Nell continues to be haunted by her own ghosts and experiences sleep paralysis. Like her mother, Nell's mental health declined to a point where it led her to go down the same unfortunate path at the end.
And you loved me the same. That's all.
Throughout the season, we get little scenes leading up to the present that shows each of the siblings struggle to come to terms with the truth behind Hill House and their mother's declining mental health, both playing a part of the childhood trauma that evidently follows them into adulthood, where they're all trying to cope in the way they know how to. But unfortunately, each of them are forced to revisit old memories and ghosts of their past before they can fully move on. By editing the show in a way that showcases the 2 separate timelines, where flashbacks of the past overlap events of the present, the viewers can recognize how the Crane family is coping with grief and trauma. In the flashback scenes of the past, we see this softer lighting, which emits this warmth and softness that a home should have for a family. But at the same time, this soft lighting creates this horrific and creepy ambiance when we see the house at night. In comparison to the scenes in the present that showcase the adult versions of the family, we get this blue and green color grading, along with the warm yellow lights that is sort of washed out. It sort of further emphasizes the horror element of death, grief, and despair throughout the show. This is most notable when we see scenes at the funeral home. In addition, when we get scenes of Luke out in the streets or in rehab, the lighting becomes evidently darker to illustrate his struggle with depression, having trouble coping with childhood trauma, grief over his twins passing, and his drug addiction. Overall, the cinematic techniques and applications of lighting, color grading, and editing allows the show to reinforce the theme of grief, and not only how the Crane siblings experience grief, but also how each of them represent the 5 stages of grief throughout The Haunting of Hill House. I will go